In this video, we're going to carry on with our car modeling series in Plasticity, so stay tuned. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to carry on with our car modeling series in Plasticity. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to carry on with the model we created in the first video, and then we're going to build out some of the big broad side surfaces. Now, I think I mentioned in the first video that I'm sort of basing this on a couple of vehicles, just general shapes, and it's always a good idea to have some general shapes in mind. I was using sort of the rough layout or scale of a 400Z, an old 240Z, the third generation Corvettes, sort of these long, low sort of front hood sections. And that's kind of the overall style that I'm going for. With that in mind, there are a couple of different ways that we can go about this process. As I mentioned, we are going to be building some surfaces rather than building an entire curve network for a whole vehicle. So what I want to focus on in this video is to build out the broad side section of this vehicle without the wheel arches. We're going to add the flares and the wheel arches afterwards. And honestly, building it with the wheel openings is a much harder process than simply building the broadside surfaces. And if you look at any car or most cars, you'll notice that those body lines generally run front to back, and they will go through where the wheel arches are, and then the arches sort of get blended in around it. Now, that's how the vehicles are sort of designed, and that's kind of how we're going to build it. So what I want to do to get started is I want to create some body lines from the side. So the first thing that I'm going to do is start with a line tool. I'm going to go to the bottom and tap shift, so I've got sort of a reference here, and I'm going to pull it out somewhere about here, which looks to be about 2 feet in front of that wheel arch. And I'm just going to draw a horizontal line. Remember, we're going to take care of flaring the fenders into the rest of the body a little bit later. I'm not too concerned with that, so I don't really care that I'm not lining up with this edge here. I'm just going to create a horizontal reference line where I think the back of the vehicle is going to be. And once I have that, then I need to go to my top view and figure out where that's going to be in space. So G and X, we're going to move this out, and it's going to be somewhere in the middle of the wheels, not completely in the middle, but give me a little bit of flare up front and a little bit bigger flare in the back. So put it somewhere around there, right click to accept, and then we can rebuild this line. So once the line is rebuilt, from the side view, it's still completely horizontal. It's essentially a line. From the front view, it's just a point because it's completely straight forward and back. And from the top view, it still looks like a line, even though we've turned this into a curve that we can now manipulate. What I want to do is I want to begin altering this curve. This is going to set the tone for where the bottom of our body line is. So at the back and the front, where the wheels are, I kind of want to keep it in that same location. So I'm going to do G and X, maybe move this one out a little bit. This point and this point here. G and X, move it out a little bit, but I want the middle to flare in just a bit. And in order to do this, I need to rebuild this curve. And when I rebuild it, because there's not much curvature here, I don't have those additional points in the middle. So instead of doing a refit with tolerance, I'm going to go to a number of points, and I'm going to change this to 6. Now, 6 will give me a few things. Now you've got a point here, and I've got a point here. I can take these and G and kind of position them about where the wheel is. Remember that this is the lower portion of the body. It's going to roll under, so I don't want it to be kind of way out here, but I'm going to reposition this, kind of pull it in a little bit, and I'll do the same thing here, reposition this one. I'll just use G and X. And then in the middle, I want it to come in a bit, and here I want it to come in a bit. And then I'll take this point and sort of move it, flare it out. Now, essentially what we've done is we've kind of decided what the bottom of that body line is going to be. In some cases, this will be straight. In a lot of cases, it'll end up going up in the front and up in the back. I'm not concerned with that yet because we're going to have to do a lot of work to get the front end shape and the back end shape. So right now, I'm really looking at a big, broad surface. I want to take this line and duplicate it, so Shift and D, And I'm going to pull it up where I want the major sort of body line on this vehicle. I'm going to keep it horizontal just for simplicity's sake. I'm not going to go crazy with a bunch of overlapping panels or anything that you see with a lot of futuristic concepts. So we're going to keep it very simple and just keep it horizontal from this view. But in the top, we do not want this line to be in the same location as the one below it. Now, if that means we need to move the one below it and kind of keep this one where it is, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to move this one out a little bit, G and X, and then the one below it, I'm actually going to move in a little bit. Yeah, we'll do that. So now we've got two. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this one again, Shift and D. This one is going to represent the top of the wheel arches. So I'm going to put it about the highest point where I think the rear arch is going to go. And then from the front, go ahead and move that in X and look at it from the top. So this is the sort of the highest position of that, if we're thinking of like a C3 Corvette, late 60s, early 70s Corvette, where we've got that big arch that sort of bulges up on the rear. That's the position that we're looking at when we're thinking about where this is in space. So probably in a little bit, but again, it's just kind of a starting concept point. We can always move these around later. But what I need to do for this one is I need to really think about how this looks in 3D. So I'm going to start moving things vertically. So G and Z, we'll move this one down. And I'll take these two, G and Z, kind of move them down. And we'll take this one, GZ, move that down. So now we've got this flared shape, goes up over the front, kind of comes down, goes up. And I did this all from a single line. We started with a line, we rebuilt it, we did another rebuild with a number of points. We began tweaking it in the vertical orientation so we knew what the body line would look like. And we just duplicated that 3 times. So this still has essentially the same curvature as all of the lines underneath it. That's kind of important for what we're doing because we don't want the body lines to start to sway or tweak as we go. So I'm going to keep these fairly similar. Let's see. If I want to, I also could think about flattening this one out a little bit or making it a bit more aggressive. And what I mean by that is, let's see which one it is. This one here. From the top, I can do GX and kind of taper this one in a bit more. And we can do the same thing at the back. So let's see this point here, GX, and kind of flare it back. So again, still very similar shape, but we're able to flare it back. And also in the middle, we may want to make these go out a bit more toward the wheel. So GX, maybe flare them this way a little bit, and kind of the same thing up front. I'll take just these two, and G and X. So now that we've got 3 curves here, if I were to just select and loft between these, this would not give me that really sharp body line that I'm looking for in the middle. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to add lines from each of these points. I'm going to right click to accept, Shift and A for the line tool, or Shift and R to repeat the last command. For me, Shift and A is a bit easier because A is right next to the Shift key. We'll do Shift A. All right, now I want to take each of these and I'm going to rebuild them. But instead of doing a refit, I'm going to do a number of points and I'm going to set this down to, well, it looks like 2 is the lowest we can go. So we'll just do a refit, it'll give us the same thing. What I was looking to do is minimize this. So basically take 1 and delete it off of each line. We'll do the same thing here. Just pick one, doesn't really matter. And then what we're going to do from the front is just use that single point and G to move in plane. And then we're going to just give it a little bit of shape. We want to make sure we're not getting anywhere close to tangency. I want to make sure that there's a hard edge in the middle. We're going to do this with 2 separate lofts. I'm going to hold down Alt and just swipe the middle mouse button to the left. G. We'll do the same thing here. Whenever we can create curvature with very minimal number of inputs, so for example, if we're just using a single input here, that single vertex in the middle, it's going to be much easier for us to get nice curvature than if we have a bunch of intermediate points. If I had 10 points on those lines, it would be extremely hard for me to get a nice looking surface out of it. So now let's start to see what this looks like. So we're going to loft these top two. This is a guide, shift select this as a guide, and then we'll do the same thing down here. We're going to loft, this is a guide, shift select that as a guide. I'm going to hide all these curves for now because I'm not sure that this is the shape that I want. J to join them together. And then I'm going to select this edge and I want to round it. So I'm going to start to pull it in. Maybe use G2 continuity. Right click to accept. Turn off our edges and make this thing shiny red. So what I'm looking to see here is that I've got a pretty well-defined body line. That midline there, if I look at it from the side, everything below it is dark and shadowed because it's got its own ambient occlusion. Essentially, it's creating its own shadow. And if I rotate it around, we can see exactly what the light does. It stops right at that edge, and this is what we want to see. This is exactly what we're looking for. And if I take a look at this in the sort of clay model, you can see that we've got a really nice, clean, well-defined line. And we did that by adding that fillet with G2 continuity. And we tried to keep the shape of each of these curves fairly consistent, which means that we're not getting a large variation in the angle of the surface from front to back. And that means that the width of that fillet is going to be somewhat consistent. Let's go ahead and bring our edges back. And this is a great starting point. And it didn't take very long for us to get this major surface. Now, there are still going to be changes. We're not going to leave the front blocky. We'll probably angle this up a little bit, and we'll do the same in the back. But this is a good starting point whenever you start to think about creating a new concept, because most of the times you'll have a big, well-defined body line somewhere, whether it's straight across like we have, or if it's sort of, coming up at an angle like this. The same process can be used. You add that curve, you rebuild it, and then you just simply play around with the shape. So if I want to move this around, this could be my body line. I could have a horizontal line below it. And again, we can do the exact same thing as we just did. So let's bring the sheet back. Now that we have this, we can decide if we want our fender flare to end at those points. Now, as I'm looking at the surface, I'm not 100% sold on the arch in the front. I think that I want it to be closer to the center of the wheel. Because I saved all those curves, I'm just going to go ahead and delete. Select all these, H to bring them back, or you can go ahead and select each of them and bring them back. And what I want to do is move this, so G and G, and then maybe move this point a bit further back. So essentially, I want that high point to be somewhere over the middle of the wheel. It doesn't have to be perfect, but that is going to look a little bit better for us. And because all we did was move it in 2D, it's very simple for us to go back and just recreate those lofts. Now, I could have figured that out before I did the join and the fillet on the edge. But again, this process is a fluid process. It's something that we need to spend a little bit of time exploring shapes. The same thing is true. We'll join it. We'll go ahead and start to blend it. I'll use G2 continuity. And again, we can just turn the edges off and just make sure that everything is still kind of in line. But from the side, now the high point is above that front wheel. The rear is a little bit different. If we want to move that around, we do the exact same process. So I'm going to go back showing the edges. Again, delete the whole thing. And then we'll just bring back each of the curves. So I'm going to take both of these, G and G, kind of move them back. And again, all I'm looking for is the high spot to be a little bit closer to above the rear wheel. And then we'll just loft between them. Remember that when you're adding multiple guides, you do need to hold down the shift key. If you try to add a secondary guide, so if I click this front one, It's not going to keep both of them. You can see that it deselected that, so you have to hold shift to get both of them. Once again, we'll hide these curves, join it, and then we'll add the fillet. When you're selecting an edge to add a fillet, where you click is where your handle is going to be. So sometimes it's easier for us to have it kind of near the front. Once again, we'll hide the edges and just make sure that everything looks good. So from the side, now the high point is here, the high point is there, and that looks pretty good. So let's go back to edges. And the next step again is to begin flaring the arches in. Now, one thing that we should consider is whether or not we want to do some trimming of this surface first. Now, I'm not going to keep this section in the middle completely flat. There is going to be some additional shape because I want to narrow the midline of the vehicle. So what's going to end up happening is we're going to sort of, cut it something like that and trim things away. It doesn't have to happen at this stage yet, but it can happen if you want to. The process just kind of depends on your workflow. What I want to do first is I want to define the rear section, the rear flare, because this to me is going to make or break whether or not this whole side of the car is going to work. So I'm not too concerned about what happens in the middle here. I'm just going to work on this flare. I'm not super sold on this piece coming straight down, so that's the first thing that I'm going to address. I'm going to use my line tool. I'm going to use K for knife, and I'm going to cut across that edge. Then I'm going to select it, and this section, you'll notice when I select it, let's go ahead and try to select it. When I select it, it doesn't highlight just that face, it does the whole thing. If this happens, this tells me that my cut didn't go all the way through. So instead of doing the knife tool, I'm going to use Control and R, and then I want to find that snap point. And now I should be able to select that individual face. We'll use Alt and J to unjoin it. And then I'm going to move it back in X. And what this allows me to do is just kind of figure out where I want that shape to be. Now the fender flare or the wheel arch can come straight back, or we can get it to sort of blend. So what I'm going to do here, go to my edge selections, I'm going to go from here to there and create a loft and just see what it looks like. Now on the second selection, we'll make it G0. And what you need to look at from here is to make sure that it's following the correct path. This one's fine because it's actually straight up and down. The one at the front where we added a bit more curvature to it, it would not work the same for that. But this one's fine, so I'm going to right click and accept that. Go back to my all selection and get rid of this piece. So this piece, I'm going to join them together. And now we've basically taken that front section of the wheel arch and flared it back. And I think that's going to look a little bit better. And we could have done it a bit higher. This is fine. Again, it's just a concept. I'm not too concerned with getting caught up on all these details. But I'm going to do the same thing at the back. So Alt and J. And then G and X. And just kind of move it back to where I want it. Go to my edge selection. Do a loft. Again, this one is straight, so it's not going to be a problem. And then all selection. Get rid of this one and join these together. You don't have to join them together, but it keeps it a little bit cleaner over here because I don't really want a ton of different sheets or surfaces floating around. Now the next step for this is to figure out where this is going to flare to. That can get a little bit tricky because we need to decide if we're going to follow the outside shape of this or if we want it to be, let's say that we wanted it to arc at the top, but maybe come out a bit further down here. This is the time where we kind of create that shape. This can be done a couple ways. I'm going to do it. I'm going to start by duplicating this edge. So Shift and D. And then I'm going to scale it up, SS. And find where I want that flare to go to. It looks like I actually duplicated the entire wheel, so let's undo that. What I want is the edge of the wheel. So Shift D, and then from the side, we'll do scale. I just wanted a curve, so we're gonna go maybe to there. And then line tool, so Shift and A, find that 3/4 position. With both of these selected, we'll do Alt and J, which will break up that bottom section. We can get rid of it. And now these lines are straight up and down. The simplest thing for us to do would be to just create a vertical line there. We can do that on the rear as well. And I actually do need to do a bit of trimming back here. So I'm going to do another line. I'm going to start here and maybe come up to the middle of that section. And then I'll add, yeah, that'll work. So we'll do that. This line isn't really needed, so I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to join these together. So J, and then I'm going to do an imprint. So Shift and I, and I'm going to imprint it to that body, which will basically give me that inside selection. We'll hide this one for now. I'm going to do the same thing here. So Shift and I, imprint it to that body. It's going to end kind of at a weird place. Let's hide that. But basically what it allows me to do is Shift delete that section, and then we are going to get rid of this inside section as well. So we'll do Shift delete. We could have done a cut and it would have worked out just fine, but sometimes this process is okay. Where things are going to get a little tricky for us is we're going to be blending this curve into this curve, and this curve has a fillet in the middle of it. So it might not work out very well, but we'll try it first. So 2 for our edge selection. Select all the way around here. I'm going to select all of these sections, make sure we don't miss any. And then hit L for loft. I'm going to do G0 at the arch, and notice that it's not really giving us anything here. I'm not surprised that it's not giving us anything, and part of the reason is these fillets. Because blending those in, it kind of loses what happens because it's trying to take tangency from here and blend it into something else. So anytime we add tangency there, it's going to kind of get messy. The way that we have to go about this is we're going to have to start splitting this piece up. So we'll go back to all selection, line tool, and we should be able to just come straight across. This one might get a little bit wider. But we're going to use these Shift I to imprint, and we'll do the same thing here. Shift I to imprint, and we'll get rid of them. So what this allows us to do is now take a look at just lofting between these. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to build out some bridge curves. I want to go from here to here. We'll set that at 0. We'll set this at 0. The second selection is going to be G0. Remember, we're not worried about what happens here. It doesn't need to be sort of bulged out. G1 at the fender, so if we want a nice smooth transition, we can have that blended. The other option that we have is to not worry at all about tangency and come back and blend it with a fillet or something like that later. Either option is fine. Depending on how aggressive the flare is, one option might be better than the other. And as I'm looking at this, bridge curve probably isn't the best solution. So I'm going to hit escape, and I'm going to do one more thing. Line tool, find that middle point, come straight up. We'll do Shift I for imprint and Shift I for imprint here. And basically this gives us a reference point. So we can start defining the flare from here down to here. So a line there to there. We'll do Shift A. We'll do a line from here to here. And we'll rebuild each of those. So now what we want to do is think about the overall shape. So if I look at this from, let's say, the back, and I use G and G, I can kind of decide how that flare is going to look without worrying about tangency. Maybe give it something like that. And then for this curve, I can do the same thing, but from the top G and G, kind of bulge it out a little bit. So now let's go to our edge selection and let's loft from one to the other. We're going to do G0 continuity. This is a guide, shift select, this is a guide, and that's the bulge that we're starting to create. Now remember, we can join these two together and we can add a fillet, or we can trim some of it away and we can blend it. But now we don't really need these curves. We do want to repeat the process down here. We're going to connect these together and we'll rebuild it. I'm going to go to a side view, hold down Alt in the middle mouse wheel to look at the bottom. And this is going to actually get a bit tricky because in reality what we want to do is kind of replicate that curve. And hopefully if we get close enough it'll be okay. And then I'll go from here to here, rebuild it, and from the bottom, just give it a little bit of shape. All right, so with our edge selection, we're going to go from bottom to bottom, G0, G0, this is a guide, shift select, this is a guide. And when we get to the section where it's straight, it kind of goes a little haywire. So you can kind of see that is not a good shape. So I'm going to undo that. From my side, I'm going to use a line tool and just draw a horizontal line forward. Shift and I to imprint it. And then once more, we're going to add a line. We'll go from there to there. We're going to rebuild that. And hopefully starting to see there's a lot of repetition in this process. Let's go ahead and make it look very similar. And now with our edge selection, we'll try to loft from one to the other. G0, G0, shift select. We'll get rid of that curve, that one. And now that we've got an edge here, this can help us drive tangency. So if I loft from one to the other, I can carry that tangency up. This is a guide with G0. Shift select, this is a guide with G0. We'll get rid of that edge. And hopefully we can loft between here. We can use this and this as a guide. Again, G0 on both. And hopefully that shape isn't too bad. So with all selection, I'm going to go ahead and grab all of these and join it together. Now the reason I want to join it together is I kind of want to do a test, see if it's going to let me blend that. It doesn't look like it. It doesn't look like it wants to do a fillet here. Probably just a bit too much going on. That's okay. There are other means that we can blend that together, and we'll take care of that in a little bit. Right now, we're looking for very general shape. So we need to repeat this process on the back side. So we need to add a line here to here. We'll rebuild it. And from a top view, just give it a little bit of shape. And with our edge selection, we'll loft from this one to this one. Again, no tangency. This is a guide. Shift select that as a guide. And this one is failing. Now, for some reason, it doesn't like driving the tangency here. We can try another method by selecting all the edges and trying our patch tool. We want to make sure we have tangency here. These are going to be G0 and that one. And that looks okay. And remember, when we use patch, it's going to automatically join them together. So it's a good start. We will go from that one to that one and line again. We'll go from here to here. Make sure we rebuild both. Go to a bottom view and try to get roughly the same shape. And we'll do the same thing here. I'm going to get that in view. So G and G. So this might give us the same problem that we had before. I'm going to go ahead and try to patch this, see what happens. Patch isn't really the best tool for that. So instead, let's go ahead and loft G0 on both of these. And that's okay. And then we'll sort of fill in this intermediate section here. Get rid of that curve. All selection. I'm going to join these together. Just make my edge selection a little bit easier. And we can patch or loft that. This is a guide, G0 and G0. And then we will join them all together. So, all right. I'm going to get rid of this curve at the bottom. I know we've just hit the 30-minute mark, and I want to try to keep these videos shorter than that. But let's just take a quick look. This is not real pretty under here. Probably going to have to do a little bit of work. There is a seam there, which is fine. Kind of carries the body line. But back here, I think that this is going to need a lot more work. Not really happy with the way that turned out, but that's okay. We can always come back and make some more adjustments. I think that's a good place for us to stop with this video. In the next one, we'll work on blending these two shapes together a bit more, and then we'll come back and we will fix this bottom section. And actually, yeah, let's do it next time because we're already over 30 minutes and I don't want to spend a bunch of time here. At this point, we're starting to build quite a bit of the major sections of the body. There's still a lot to do. It's going to take time. We still have to figure out the hood shape. We have to figure out where the glass is, what the overall roof line is going to look like. All that stuff has to come. But this is a great starting point. So at this point, make sure that you do save your work. I do recommend doing a save as. So I'm going to save it with just the number of the video. So we'll do concept car 2. And each time I'll just keep incrementing that. So I can always go back to that one previous version if I need to. So if you have any questions on what we've done so far, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.